Let's make some plant-based huaraches in the Blue Mountains, Ontario, Canada. Welcome back to the Whole Food Plant-Based Cooking Show, where we make plant-based cooking easy. I'm Jill, and today we are making huaraches, which if you hadn't heard of them, I hadn't heard of them before, but it is a very traditional Mexican street food. And we discovered these when we were shifting from Toronto up to the Blue Mountains where we are right now. And we drove through a town called Barrie, and we were looking for some lunch and found this completely plant-based restaurant called Mexhico. It was just the most wonderful little place of very traditional decorations, and the menu weren't typically things you would find in just any old Mexican restaurant. These were very traditional restaurants, and we ended up meeting the owner, and she said these were recipes that were from her family. So I tried the huaraches and I was just blown away. They were so good. And they are based off of, like the huarache sandals, you know, they have the base, which is a cornmeal or masa base. That's the shape of a huarache sandal. So we're gonna jump right in. We're gonna start with our refried beans. And all of our pantry ingredients today are from our partner Essential Organics, who carry over 600 organic products. And if you want to check them out, you can use the code PLANTBASEDEASY at checkout for 10% off your first order. So we are going to jump right in first, and we are going to fry our onions and garlic together a little bit. This is 1/4 of a cup of diced onion. And I'm not using any oil because I don't use oil on our dishes or any of our cooking. But if it starts to stick a little bit, all you have to do is sprinkle just a little bit of water and it will de-stick from the pan. So I'm just going to cook these just for a couple minutes here before I add my garlic. Because if you know garlic, you put it in there and you don't want to cook it very long because it burns really easily. And my burner is on medium heat. All right, so I'm sticking in 1 clove of finely minced garlic. I'm just going to put a little bit of water. Just to get it cooking a little bit better. All right, I'm going to let this cook for just maybe 1 more minute, and then I'll tell you what we're going to add to it. Okay, to this I'm going to add 1/4 of a teaspoon of cumin and 1/4 of a teaspoon of chili powder. 1 teaspoon of a low sodium tamari, but you could use whatever salt replacement you would like. You could use soy sauce or Bragg's liquid aminos. They all work just about the same in this recipe. Okay. And now I'm going to add our beans. So this is 1 can of drained and rinsed black beans. We're just going to cook them together for a few minutes, you know, probably, I don't know, a little less than 5 minutes, just to kind of soften them up a little bit. Okay, now that our beans are fully cooked, I'm going to move them over here and we're going to just mash them, because typically these would have refried beans on them, and most refried beans, if you get them in the can or any other way, they usually have oil or some kind of fat in them, but we're not making that with that. You can just simply mash them with a potato masher, or even just a wooden spoon or something like that. And I'm not going to mash them completely because I like to see some of the whole beans still in there, but just partially mashed. Okay, just like that. And now we're going to move on to our next topping, the thing that goes on top of the bean layer. There's no denying the plant-based diet is a nutrient powerhouse, but did you know there are a handful of hard-to-get nutrients even well-crafted diets are often lacking? The latest research suggests that complementing your diet with a few specific vitamins, minerals, and omega-3s will help boost your energy and keep you thriving for the long term. That's why my daily health routine includes Complement Essential. Complement Essential contains the 8 critical nutrients lacking from most plant-based diets in dosages optimized specifically for us. As a special discount for our viewers, just use code PLANTBASEDEASY at checkout to save 15% off of your order. Okay, for the second layer, we are going to make, it's typically like a ground meat of some type. So we're going to make our meat with cauliflower. But we're going to start with an onion. This is 1/2 cup of onion. We just need to saute for a few minutes. And the same, just use a little bit of water if it starts to stick. And then we'll throw in our garlic in the last probably 30 seconds of cooking it before we add our other ingredients. Okay, now for our 2 cloves of minced garlic, finely minced garlic. I'm just gonna cook that just lightly. And it will continue to cook as we put our other ingredients in there. All right, so our next ingredient is cauliflower. This is 2.5 cups of very finely minced cauliflower. All I did was just cut it really finely on a chopping block, or you could do a grater, or even better, if you can find them in the grocery store. Some grocery stores already have frozen bags of riced cauliflower, which is super convenient. And then for our spices, we have 1 teaspoon of cumin, 1 teaspoon of chili powder, 1/2 teaspoon of oregano, and 1 tablespoon of smoked paprika. Let's stir that around a bit. Okay, and then we're going to add 1 tablespoon of low sodium tamari, and then a bunch of cracked pepper. I probably put somewhere between 1/2 teaspoon and 1 teaspoon of cracked pepper. Okay, and then 1 cup of water. And we're just going to let this simmer for about 15 minutes or until the cauliflower is nice and soft. And it's all really kind of uniformly colored. That paprika and the chili powder color will soak into the cauliflower and make it a little bit more of a uniform color. Okay, before we move on to our scallion cream, we got to check in on our sprouts. So this is our sprouting kit from the Sprouting Company. And this is our broccoli sprouts, because those are my all-time favorite. And this is about day 2 of sprouting. So we've got a couple days left before we can eat these. So great. And if you want to get set up with your own kit, you can use the code PLANTBASEDEASY at checkout for 10% off your order. All right, now on to the scallion cream. Okay, for the scallion cream, I've got 2 scallions here that I just roughly chopped up. Then I've got 1 tablespoon of cilantro, 2 tablespoons of lime juice, 1 teaspoon of low sodium tamari, and then we're going to use 1 whole avocado. This is going to be the prettiest green. It looks kind of like guacamole, but it's a little bit creamier and a little bit runnier than guacamole. But super, super delicious. And then 1/3 cup of water. And you're just going to blend this up until it's really super, super creamy. Okay, there we go. Beautiful, isn't it? All right, so now all that's left is to get onto the base. So we're going to make our masa base next. Okay, for the base, for that little huarache sandal, we need masa. So I've got 1 cup of blue corn masa, but you can use just regular masa. And no, you can't use cornmeal. Cornmeal and masa are not the same. They are processed differently. So you need to find some masa. All right, so 1 cup of masa, 1/2 teaspoon of low sodium tamari, and then 3/4 cup of water, but we're gonna add it slowly as we go. We're just gonna add a little bit and mix. And then add a little bit more, because depending on your masa, you might not need all of this or you might need a little bit more. But all of them are just a little bit different, so you have to just go by the feel. And I'll show you what it should look like when we're ready to roll them out. And if you're enjoying the show and want to help us make plant-based cooking easy, follow the link in the description and become a supporting member today. Okay, when you get it to this point and you feel like you've got all of the masa kind of moistened, then you're going to need to work it with your hands, because we need to knead this for just a little bit, just a couple minutes, to really get it all incorporated and so it sticks together really well, because we don't want it to be dry or crumbly. It really needs to hold together as a whole piece, because that is what's going to hold all of those toppings that we just made together. So just knead it for a couple minutes. And then for the next step, you're going to need some parchment paper and some kind of rolling pin. I have just a small little rolling pin, or you could use like a little dowel rod or something. That would work too. All right, so your dough should look like this. It shouldn't be super sticky. If you're touching it to your hand like that, it shouldn't stick to your hand. There shouldn't be left any of the dough left on your hand there. So that is just right, and it feels really nice and kind of soft and silky. All right, so we're gonna move these things out of the way. And then you're gonna need some kind of pan. And I'm using a carbon steel pan here that is well seasoned. You could also use cast iron, that works great. Cast iron works even better. We're gonna divide this into 3 equal pieces, because this is for 3 servings, 3 huaraches. So just roughly, they don't have to be super exact. There we go. Set these here. And this particular masa stays really nice and moist. I don't even have to cover it with a towel, but maybe with the regular yellow corn masa, you might want to just cover these other 2 with a towel so they don't dry out while we're cooking this one. So for this part, you just kind of roll it into a little bit of a tube, probably about 4 inches long, like that. And we open up our parchment paper, put it on there. And then for that first initial squeeze, I'm just going to use a pan. You could use like a bowl or something that has a flat surface that's a little bit heavier, just to kind of press it down first. And then you're going to just roll it out a little bit flatter, so it's the shape of a huarache sandal. And then if you want to make the edges look neater, you can just kind of press it with your hands a little bit around the edge, just so you have a nicer edge to it. It's not so jagged looking. Okay, and there we have our rough shape like that. So it's just kind of oblong. One side is usually a little bit larger than the other, just like the bottom of a sandal. And then I usually put my hand flat like this, peel the parchment paper off, and then throw it right on my skillet, just like that. And we're gonna let that cook for about a minute on one side till it's really nice and brown, and so that when you try to flop it, it doesn't come apart, it doesn't break apart. So it needs to be pretty well cooked on that first side before you flip it, or it will break in half. All right, I'm gonna make these other 2, and then I'll show you when I'm finished. All right, our huaraches bases are done. If you wanna come in for a closer look, now all that's left is to assemble and go for a taste, so I'll meet you at the table for a taste. All right, let's assemble. All right, so I already have my huarache base, and then I'm gonna put my beans first. And you just have to remember that there's enough toppings for 3 of these, so just divide it equally. All right, so some beans. Then the taco mince. Oh, my mouth is watering. This smells so good. Okay. And then our scallion cream. Smooth that around a little bit. And then the pico de gallo on the top, and you could use salsa. This is just a simple pico de gallo, which is diced tomatoes, diced red onion, a little bit of jalapeno, cilantro, and lime juice. Plenty of lime juice. Okay, and if you want to make it a little bit spicier, you could even do some like sliced jalapenos on top. That would be really delicious. All right, here we go. Oops, get a little of everything in here. Wow. That is some serious flavor. Oh, and that masa corn base is so soft. One of these and it's so filling. You are going to love it. Come on back next week for another great recipe.